can open up for questions. So, and if no one has a question, I'll do the selfish thing of asking the first question. Just out of curiosity, what is the reaction of other prisoners to these inmates? Just because the way you describe them, they don't seem to be run-of-the-mill criminals and or gangs and stuff like that. So
Right.
I'm sure that they do stand out among the populace. So
They do.
what is the reaction and the vibe from like other prisoners towards that?
Well, it's interesting because life in prison, what I learned from these guys, you have to belong to something. And obviously, they don't belong to any gangs or anything like that. I mean, so being a part of the Muslim community in the prison is really what's protecting them. And from what I've researched and learned and heard, the Muslim brothers in the prison are highly respected and nobody messes with them. People know that they're clean, they're honest, they're basically and they stand up for each other. So they are they're highly educated guys. So they teach Arabic and they're imams. They hold prayers and they teach other people Islam and they help people other inmates get their GEDs and stuff like that. There's a great story, but at the same time, there's no one to talk to. Everybody's got a third grade education. These guys are all engineers and doctors. I mean, these are all highly educated people, but it's the kind of people that are incredible in that any environment in which they find themselves, they contribute. They're devout Muslims. They are very religious people, and they believe that this was a gift from God. They absolutely believe this is a burden that God has placed upon them because God has faith in their ability to carry this burden. And this is the question that I've asked myself: how do you not lose your mind? And their faith is how they don't lose their mind, and their faith is what allows them, I think, to contribute in whatever prison they happen to be, in whatever environment they happen to be. They contribute to themselves, to other prisoners, to whatever they can. There are all these stories about a lot of little anecdotes that they told me that are in the book. At one point they were all in prison, and there were 2 in one cell and 2 in another cell. So what do? How do they? And they don't know how long they're going to be there. They're in this kind of a confined, solitary, not exactly, but they're tucked away from all the other inmates. And so they decide to practice reciting the Quran. And the one guy, Muhammad ibn Zayn, who was the older guy, was in one of the cells. So they started yelling through the vents and asking him about a certain verse. And he would, from the vent, recite the verse, and they would practice it, and then they would call him again and this is how they spent hours. Whereas I would lose my mind. You know what I mean? Stuff like that. That's what their life is. They're just. I won't tell you all this. The more I think about it, the more I'm remembering all these great little stories that they told me about stuff in the prison. But this is their life in the prison. They make the absolute most of it. Yeah, they're exceptional people. Yeah.
Do you think the timing of the association coming together or coming to fame or becoming powerful, coinciding with 9/11, contribute into the demise of them and the child? Because there are some other Palestinian organizations that exist right now, and there is a big organization I think it's called Islamic Relief, where they send money to overseas, like Palestine and any country that is in need, and any Muslim basically. So why, from your perspective and from what you heard from them, why were they targeted in particular, whereas there are other organizations that have not been through the same thing?
Well, several reasons. First of all, I think now, since they were closed down, all these other organizations have to be very, very careful who they give money to, how they send money. Things have changed dramatically. They're not able to do the things that Holy Land was able to do. Absolutely not. But I think they were targeted, number one, because they were doing such a good job and they had such a good reputation. So the better the reputation became, the worse things, we're going to cap into them. because we can't have a Palestinian Muslim organization, you know, with a good, and they were, and this is something that I talked to them a lot about, and they see it the same way. They were in a way that they were not aware of, questioning or raising questions about the actual narrative. It's all about the narrative. There's a narrative here which is like the Holy Grail, which basically says Israel and Zionism are good and right, Palestinians are terrorists. Kind of to make it simple. And Israel puts its entire money and thought and technology and everything to maintain that, the legitimacy of that narrative. Anybody who tries to poke holes in this narrative will have to be brought down. And they didn't mean to, because they weren't dealing with politics, but they were presenting a story, and they were painting a picture that was threatening this narrative. And they had to be brought down. And then 9/11 was a big help in bringing them down. 9/11 basically opened the door to all this anti-Palestinian, anti-Muslim sentiment. You know, it kind of it was, in that regard, 9/11 was a big help to these groups. And there we are today. So today, groups that work, Islamic Relief and all these other organizations, they have to be very, very careful. It's a completely different ballgame, what they're able or not able to do in Palestine today.
Do you think by you publishing this book, you might make some kind of an impact, and hopefully
that's the hope.
Try to rectify the situation?
Look, the best, the ideal situation is somebody, I don't know, Spike Lee, I don't know, somebody, Trevor Noah, somebody, opening the book and going, we got to do something about this. This is wrong. That's the hope. Will it happen? I don't know, but that's certainly something that I was hoping to get to when I was working on the book, because to get the word out.
It's kind of a personal question, but have you ever personally been threatened?
No. Yeah, you had a question back there.
Well, I'm just going to follow up on. You said that you were hoping like a Trevor Noah or a Spike Lee. Did you send them a copy of your book?
Oh yeah, the publisher sent copies to all the shows, all the everybody. Yeah.
Okay. So my original question was going to be: are all of them? I came in a little late, so maybe forgive me if you already answered this question. Are they all in the same prison now?
No, they're
They're
never.
not.
No, they're not all in the same prison.
Are any of them in the same prison?
No.
None of them.
No. They were at first they were all in Segoville, Texas. I'm not sure how you pronounce this. And that was not far from where they lived, most of them, because they're most of them are from Dallas. Segoville is how it's pronounced, Segoville. And then after about a year and a half, they were all pulled out, just completely random. They thought they were going to exercise or something, and they went to solitary. And they didn't know why, or for how long, or what in the world was going on. And then they realized, and then, so they were in solitary for a while, and then nobody told them anything, and then one day, again, they thought they were going, I don't know, to lunch or something, and they were put on buses and sent on a long drive. And one of them, Mufid, actually wrote a detailed account, and I put it in the book, of what that long, days and days and days, handcuffed, shackled on a bus. And they didn't know where they were going. And eventually they ended up in the Bureau of Prisons has this transportation area where prisoners come and go and are sent all over the country, and then they were put on planes, and they still didn't know where they were going, and they ended up in these special prisons called CMUs, Communication Management Units, which are like mini Guantanamos here in the U.S. And so then they were there for a while. And then one at a time, they sent them back. After a while, they sent them back to regular general population prisons. So they were together for a while, but there are two of these CMUs, one in Indiana, one in Illinois, so they were separated. And then they were separated and sent just all over the place. And they're all over the place, and they're moved around quite a lot. They moved around quite a lot, yeah. It's
So in each prison, they're each engaged in the way that you described. In each prison, they've sort of taken on this leadership role?
Yeah,
to
wherever they can,
change it?
absolutely. Wherever they can, absolutely. Because, you know, they're Arabs, they speak Arabic, they can read the Quran,
Yeah.
they're religious people, they're respected, and so they take on, naturally, they take on that role. And the stories of the Brotherhood within the prison are very heartwarming. I mean, there's a real connection that takes place. And so, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I've been going around quite a bit and hearing this of late from various Washington progressive think tanks, policy institutes, and I've been hearing things like, well, it's not so much American foreign policy, I'm paraphrasing here, but it must be initiatives from Israel. And I was wondering if you could give me some commentary on that. And this is something new to me. I hadn't actually heard this in these types of circles before. They're very aware of BDS, it seems, but they may or may not be so much aware of what an initiative looks like in different initiatives in Israel and policy in the United States.
Well, that's an interesting question. I think if we look at since last December with the Jerusalem Declaration. So we have the Jerusalem Declaration, the Iran, pulling out of the Iran deal, now this thing with UNRWA, closing the mission
Embassy.
recently, all these different things. You know, I think if Benjamin Netanyahu had a wish list, this is it. So I think clearly these policies are Israeli policies that the United States is just happy to accommodate. And I think it has to do with a very close relationship between Netanyahu and Trump. In a larger picture, I think the connection between the two is one of mutual benefit. I mean, the convergence of interests between Israel and America is what creates this very, very strong relationship. You know, they talk about shared values. You know, both countries were built on genocide and racism and violence, so they get along very well. They understand each other very well. But I think particularly in the last, since December, these particular issues, the stance that this administration has taken on each and every one of these issues, this is all a menu that Benjamin Netanyahu wrote, And in return, what it's done, it's made him the most powerful politician ever, the most powerful prime minister in Israel ever. I mean, this is like a dream of any Israeli prime minister. Everything that happened since December is a dream. I mean, no Israeli prime minister could ever imagined any of these things happening with such ease. The United States just completely willing and able and happy to accommodate Israel. So I'm not surprised people are talking like this now, because it's become more evident than ever that this is the issue here. I'd be surprised if Trump knows what UNRWA stands for, or he can find Palestine on a map, or knows what a refugee is. But he's getting this information, and he's got Netanyahu, Edelson, he's got the son-in-law that's well connected, and I think this is what's happening here. It's very, very troubling. Again, it's one of those things that should be very, very troubling to everybody. Yeah.
I have another question.
Yeah.
So, other than telling their stories and what happened to them, and kind of shedding light on how the whole organization came to fail and was prosecuted and all. If you were to say what's the moral of the story, and is it a cautionary tale, or for anybody who's Palestinian and lives in the United States, you shouldn't feel doomed, but also you should be aware of the threats and the reality of being a Muslim Palestinian.
Yeah.
What would you say this book would provide is there an advice, or is there any sort of a way out, or are you just gonna be, what is it called, driving while Palestinian, or
Yeah, exactly. The reality is that America is a very racist place. Always has been, and probably will continue to be for a very long time. That's the reality. If these guys were white, not in a million years this would happen to them, right? And so it has to do with that. So what I would say if I was to suggest somebody who lives here, you need to stand up. You just stand up. You need to stand up. You need to stand up. You need to fight it. It's not easy. It's not popular. It's frightening. It's dangerous, especially if you're not white. But it's all there is. You know, I mean, it's all there is. And there are a lot of lessons that I think can be learned from the black experience in America as well, because they've been through this, you know, in the 60s and, you know, the FBI and all the different things that were going on. And to work together with everybody else, because there's nothing unique about this particular case. It's just that it happened to these particular guys at a particular moment in history, whereas it happened to others at other point, you know what I mean? So I think the lesson is to fight the racism, to fight for justice, to stand up, and to work with other groups who have experienced the same thing, you know, and to stand up always, you know, not to hide.
Especially if you were like a black Muslim, you would get a double dose.
Yeah,
wouldn't you?
of course.
Woman.
Yeah, woman, yeah.
What benefits do you think the U.S. or the Trump administration is getting in return to all this stuff that it's giving to Israel? I mean, I don't see, I guess they have about 200 million Arabs and Muslims that in terms of economics, I mean, bigger markets, more resources, all the
Yeah.
oil, endless, you know, connections. So what are they getting in return by giving the kitchen sink to Israel, by doing all these things?
Nothing. This has everything to do with it's a personal gift from Trump to Netanyahu. In this particular case, and these particular issues, I think this is a personal political gift from Trump to Netanyahu. When Netanyahu came back, when the Jerusalem Declaration, when, you know, Trump declared that they recognized Jerusalem and they moved the embassy, he couldn't have done anything more beneficial to Netanyahu. He couldn't. There's nothing he could have done. Not money, not weapons, not anything more beneficial to an Israeli prime minister than that. And everything that followed, you know, I mean, pulling out of the Iran deal, every expert around the world, every agency around the world, every country around the world was against pulling out. Only one person wanted, well, maybe two, the Saudis wanted it too, but really one person of influence said that America should pull out, and that was Netanyahu. So I think in this particular case, that's the issue. In the larger scheme, I think you probably know as well as I do that Israel has a very effective lobby in America. Now, it's not the only effective lobby in America. It's not the only lobby that has politicians in their pocket. But the pharmaceuticals, the NRA, the Israeli lobby, I mean, there are certain, the insurance companies, there are certain, because of the system here allows for this type of corruption, these lobbies just get away with murder. They fight, and they've been doing it for a very long time. They are very well experienced. They know how to get it done. They are seeped into every aspect of American life, of American culture, of American society. And that's how they succeed. And I think there's that kind of effective work is lacking on the Arab side, on the Palestinian side. You don't see that kind of organization. The Zionists were zealots from the very beginning, and they worked like zealots, to a point where, was it here in Virginia, they were talking about changing the textbooks and putting in more Zionist narratives in the textbooks.
They weren't allowed to say that Palestine was occupied.
For example, you know, or even before this, you know, my kids went to high school. They took it's called AP World History. It's a college course, right? It's the entire world history in a book in 1 year, and you read the parts about, you know, the Middle East, the Holy Land. It's all biblical. It's all from the Old Testament. It's not even history. You know, King David, King this, King that. And I remember saying to the history teacher, "Why are you teaching this? This is biblical. It's not history. Are you teaching creationism too?" So that's the influence. That's how effective the Israeli lobby has been and all of its tentacles, you know. And you don't have that kind of zealot activism, I don't think, on parts of any other group, ethnic group, but certainly not the Palestinians or the Arabs. So their case is not being heard as much. You know, we're talking about kids already. You're not talking about lobbies here in Washington, D.C. But on this particular case, there's no return. It's just Trump, and he likes Netanyahu, and he's got the son-in-law and the Edelson, and it's just this little clique. So why not give him the favors, you know? Let's not do it. Who cares?
Well, that's our job to represent Palestinians, really.
And it's our job to represent justice for, absolutely. It's our job to do that. You know, I think as people of conscience, it's what we have to do. That kind of goes back to your question as well. As people of conscience, this is what we need to do, and we need to be very clear about it. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much.
Well, you're welcome. You know,
Yeah.
grab the book, see if you like it, tell me what you think. Hope you like the book. I certainly learned a lot in the process of writing it. It was an incredible lesson for me. Many lessons, but overall, it was incredibly interesting for me to write this book.
Can I ask a question? What was your biggest takeaway in terms of a lesson learned?
Well, you missed that bit. I said that in the beginning.
I did,
There were several things, you know, but the fact that the assumption that there is an honest judicial system in America, and that there are civil liberties in America. This assumption is only exists within the realm of, you know, white, privileged people. You know, because blacks don't have that expectation. They've never had that. And other minorities, you know, never had it. And suddenly you know, somebody like me discovered this story, and I'm shocked. You know, as I learned more, and as I talked about this with other communities, I realized for them there's no shock. You know, so that's probably one of the biggest takeaways. Yeah, I learned a lot about Islam too. These guys taught me a lot about Islam. It was very interesting. They're very happy to educate me, and it was really very cool. Very, very cool. And about Palestine and their own personal histories. 3 of them come from the same village in Palestine, Silwad.
Silwan.
3 of them come from the exact same place in village in
Which,
Palestine.
interestingly enough, is still considered a very patriotic city.
Yeah, well, they call it a village, but yeah.
Yeah. Well,
And so, and how that happened or why, or, you know, and the families are connected. And so I went there. I went to Palestine. I went to Silwad. I saw their family homes there. I spoke to the neighbors. You know, Silwad is known for activism, for heroism. There's a lot of stories. So I put some of them in the book. You know, although the publisher wasn't crazy, we had this argument. There's a particular story from Silwad. A young man named Tahir who was 19 or 20 years old during the second Intifada, and there was a checkpoint. Silwad is up on a hill. It's a spectacularly beautiful place. Absolutely spectacularly beautiful. And there's an intersection down below, and there's some settlements there. And there was a checkpoint. And so one day he got on a mule, took an old World War II rifle that his uncle had somewhere in the back of the house, a bunch of bullets, and from up top somewhere, he shot and killed 12 soldiers who had no idea what the hell was going on, where it was coming from. And then he went back home, put the gun away, and that was the end of it. And for 2 years, nobody could figure out what happened. They thought some mercenary from Chechnya or from the IRA, or they could not figure out, because you know, that kind of marksmanship, you have to be trained. The guy had never trained, it had to be somebody who had military training, they assume. Anyway, they ended up, he's serving 12 life sentences now. He made the mistake that a lot of people make, was just to tell someone. And so Silwad and it's known, it's had a history of, you know, so, you know, it was really interesting to be there with the people from the village and talk to them and all that, and see the school and see you know, there's a kindergarten that Hoyland Foundation sent money and built, so there's a plaque, you know, stuff like that. Anyway, so that was, and then the other 2 are from Gaza. One is a refugee, and one is a Gaza family. And he talks about his grandfather and growing up in his grandfather's estate, and just growing up, you know, Gaza's, you know, it's beautiful. There's these dunes and, you know, citrus smell everywhere, and, you know, so it's very, very interesting. So that was, I learned a lot. Yeah, it was very good. I'm glad I did it.
Cool. Mr. Peled, if you have a little bit of time afterwards, people can, if they do get the book.
Sure, I'd be happy to sign, yeah. I have a pen and everything.
Otherwise, it's just
Sure.
right down
Thank
the
you all
road.
very much.
Thank you so much.